Before I tell you how everything unraveled, there's something you need to understand. Nothing is more painful than giving everything you have and still being told it's not enough. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from the people you've loved most, the ones you raised, the ones who once held your hand as children, and now they barely look you in the eye. I thought I had it all figured out, that I had done everything right, but I was wrong. Winter was still in full swing, the chill biting at the edges of my skin as I shoveled the snow off my porch. I had lived in this house for years. My husband, Dan, and I had raised 2 children here, and now, after his death, it was just me. I was used to the silence by now, but that morning, the phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Jake, my son. His voice was quieter than usual, almost too careful, like he was about to say something difficult. "Hey, Mom," he said. "How are you doing?" I hadn't heard from him in nearly 2 weeks. It wasn't unusual. Ever since he married Claire, our calls had become less frequent, shorter, polite, but distant. "I'm fine," I answered, trying to keep my tone light. "Just keeping busy with the garden and going through some of Dan's old things." That was a lie. I hadn't touched Dan's clothes or belongings since the funeral. Every time I thought about it, the weight of grief almost knocked me over. But Jake didn't need to know that. "I've been thinking," Jake said, his voice now more tentative. "Maybe it's time you came to stay with us for a while. Claire and I both think it might be good for you to be around family. The kids miss you, and we've got that extra room." The words hung in the air. It took everything in me not to react. I hadn't visited them in months, and the last time I did, Claire barely spoke to me. She was always so preoccupied with her own life, her work, her social media. I knew Jake was trying to be kind, but something didn't feel right. I paused. "I don't know, Jake. I've gotten used to the quiet here." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when he spoke again, his voice had that familiar hesitation. "It would be nice to have you around, Mom. The kids would love it. And well, we just want to make sure you're okay. You don't have to stay forever. Just for a bit." His words seemed innocent enough, but there was something about them that made me uneasy. It felt like he was trying to talk me into something he knew I wasn't ready for. But then, I thought about the loneliness I had been feeling, the empty house, the long, cold nights spent in a space that felt more and more like a stranger's home. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice more cautious than I intended. I didn't make a decision right away. For the next week, I went through the motions of my daily life, pretending I wasn't torn by the thought of leaving everything I had known. Dan's absence still loomed large, and the idea of moving into Jake's house felt like admitting that I was no longer capable of taking care of myself. I wasn't ready to face that truth. But in the end, loneliness won out. I packed a suitcase with enough clothes for a long stay and left my house the way I found it, quiet, a little sad, but still standing. When I arrived at Jake's house, no one came out to greet me. The door opened, and there was Claire, her face tight, her eyes distracted. She didn't smile, didn't even say hello at first. "You're early," she said, stepping aside to let me in. The house smelled like takeout and diapers. Toys littered the floor, and a cartoon played loudly on the TV in the background. I had expected chaos. I had expected change. But it still stung to walk into a home that felt more like a set than a place I was meant to be. Jake came downstairs with one of the kids in his arms, but his greeting was quick, almost mechanical. "We cleared out the guest room for you," he said, ushering me upstairs. When I entered the room, I froze. The space wasn't ready for me at all. Boxes were piled everywhere. A broken lamp sat in the corner, and the bed was an air mattress with a thin, crumpled blanket thrown over it. No closet, no shelves, no place for my things. I forced a smile. "It'll do." I spent the first night on that air mattress, listening to the sounds of a house I didn't belong to. I told myself that I was needed, that this was what family did for each other. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into a place where I wasn't wanted, only needed for things that had nothing to do with family. I didn't realize it yet, but I had walked into a quiet betrayal, the kind that doesn't break you all at once, but chips away day by day until there's nothing left to give. The days that followed felt like a slow unraveling. At first, I kept telling myself that this was just a phase, transitioning into a new environment, getting used to a different routine. But with each passing day, it became harder to ignore the subtle dismissals, the quiet judgments. I tried to contribute wherever I could to make myself useful, but everything I did seemed to fall short of what they expected. One morning, I decided to make breakfast for everyone. I wanted to do something nice, to feel like I belonged in this house, to show them that I wasn't just a guest. I made pancakes, bacon, eggs, enough to feed the four of us, plus the kids. I set the table with care, folding napkins just the way I had always done at home. But when Claire came downstairs, she barely glanced at the spread I had laid out. Instead, she went straight to the counter and poured herself a coffee, not bothering to acknowledge the breakfast I'd prepared. Jake, too, didn't seem to notice. He kissed Claire on the cheek and sat down at the table, his eyes glued to his phone. The kids, of course, were too young to care about anything beyond their own little worlds. I waited, watching them eat in silence. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. Finally, after a few minutes, Claire let out a sigh, glancing over at me as she stirred her coffee. "I thought you said you were going to keep the breakfast simple," she said, her tone almost accusatory. "We're really trying to watch our calories around here." I froze. My stomach churned, but I didn't say anything. What could I say? She didn't appreciate the gesture. She didn't even see it as a gesture. It was just something else for her to criticize. I forced a smile and excused myself from the table, retreating to the guest room to collect my thoughts. It was then that I realized, no matter what I did, no matter how much I helped, I was never going to be seen as more than a temporary solution. I was a babysitter, a cleaner, a second-hand resource. I wasn't here because they missed me. I was here because they needed something from me. And once that need was gone, I would be forgotten. The realization hit me like a cold wave. But I stayed. I kept telling myself that things would get better. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe Claire was just stressed. I convinced myself that I had no right to complain. After all, I had offered to help. But the cracks in our relationship began to show more and more, and the weight of them grew heavier each day. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry in the basement, Jake came down to check on me. He was quiet, distant. "You've been quiet lately, Mom. Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of concern. I didn't answer right away. I didn't know how to answer. What could I say? The truth was, I didn't feel okay. I felt more isolated than I ever had in my life. I wasn't part of their lives, not really. I was an outsider in my own son's home. "It's fine, Jake," I said, trying to smile. "I'm just adjusting to the new routine. I'll be okay." But even as I said the words, I knew they were a lie. Nothing about this felt okay. That evening, as I was cleaning the kitchen after dinner, Jake and Claire sat at the table, their heads close together as they whispered. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I knew they were talking about me. I could feel the tension between us, thick and suffocating. It wasn't until later that night, as I sat in the makeshift room they had set up for me, that I learned just how bad things had gotten. Jake came in, his face tight, his eyes weary. "Mom," he started, his voice softer than usual. "I've been talking to Claire, and we both think it might be time for you to start helping out more. You know, with the mortgage. Things are tight right now." I stared at him, stunned. The words hung in the air like a slap. "Helping out with the mortgage?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," Jake continued, his voice filled with an edge of discomfort. "We've been struggling with bills lately, and it's just a lot to manage. We're just asking if you could pitch in a little, just until we get back on our feet." I didn't know what to say. The request hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been here for a month, helping in every way I could, but now they wanted more. They wanted money. They needed my savings, the little bit I had left after years of giving everything to my own family. I looked at Jake, trying to read his expression. He was tired. I could see that. He had the weight of his own family on his shoulders. But there was something else behind his eyes, something I hadn't seen before. Guilt. It was a fleeting look, but it was there. And I hated that I could see it. "I'll help," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I'll transfer the money tomorrow." But inside, something shifted. I realized for the first time that I wasn't just a mother trying to help her son. I was a pawn in a game I hadn't agreed to play. They weren't asking me to help because they loved me. They were asking me to help because they were desperate, and I had become their lifeline. The next day, I made the transfer. I didn't ask how much they needed. I didn't question them. I just did it. But as I clicked the final button, a wave of resentment washed over me. I had given them everything, my time, my energy, my love, and still it wasn't enough. The following weeks were a blur of helping, giving, and trying to be invisible in a house that never felt like my own. The request for the mortgage payment wasn't the last. Every month it became a routine. Jake would call me down after dinner, his voice apologetic but firm. "Hey, Mom, things are tight again. Could you help with the mortgage this month?" I began to dread these conversations. The weight of it, the underlying expectation that I would comply, drained me each time. I'd get up, go to my room, and look at my bank account. Each transfer felt like I was giving up a piece of myself, as if I had to pay for the right to stay in my own son's home. But what could I do? They needed help, right? They were struggling. Claire never directly asked for money, but her actions spoke louder than words. She would complain about the bills, about the groceries, about the cost of everything. She'd sigh dramatically while scrolling through her phone, showing me pictures of the latest shopping hauls, new shoes, purses, gadgets, and I began to wonder where the money was really going. I was helping with the mortgage, but I was starting to feel like a temporary solution, not a part of their lives. One evening, I made a simple meal, something comforting, the kind of food that used to bring us together when Jake was younger. A homemade chicken pot pie with mashed potatoes. I thought it would be a nice gesture, a way to rekindle some connection, maybe bridge the gap that had been growing between us. I set the table just like I used to at home, folding napkins with a smile. But when Claire walked in, she didn't even acknowledge the meal. She glanced at it, sighed, and went straight to the kitchen to grab a frozen dinner instead. Jake joined her, muttering something about how he couldn't have too much heavy food, and proceeded to microwave a prepackaged meal. I stood there, frozen. I had put so much effort into making this dinner, and here they were, ignoring it. I felt small, invisible. The love I had poured into making that meal, the years I spent feeding and caring for them, it didn't matter. It was a stark reminder that I wasn't seen for who I was anymore. I was just someone to fill the gaps, someone to take care of the mundane tasks while they went on with their lives without a second thought. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I heard Claire and Jake talking in the kitchen. I tried to ignore it, but their words were loud enough to cut through the silence. "Mom's not really contributing much," Claire said, her voice flat. But I could hear the subtle irritation in it. She's always so tired or busy with her things. I mean, how much longer can we keep doing this? I don't want to sound ungrateful, but this isn't working." I felt a knot tighten in my chest. How could they say that? I had been the one cooking, cleaning, babysitting, and giving them money every month, but it wasn't enough. Claire didn't see the effort I was putting in. She didn't see me as a person, just as a resource. Jake didn't respond immediately. I could hear him moving around the kitchen, maybe stirring his coffee, or maybe he was avoiding the conversation. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer than usual. "I know, Claire. I don't know what to do. I just feel guilty. She's my mom, you know? She's been through so much with Dad's passing, but I'm stretched thin. You're right." The words stung more than I expected. "You're right." As though everything I had done was a given, as though my sacrifices weren't acknowledged, just expected. It felt like they were already planning for me to leave, even though no one had said a word to me directly. The thought of it made my chest tighten. I couldn't stay in that house another day, not like this. I had been giving so much of myself, but nothing I did was enough. They didn't need me in the way I thought they did. I wasn't their family anymore. I was just a helper, a financial crutch they'd leaned on until they no longer needed me. The next evening, as I sat alone in my room, the weight of the situation hit me all at once. I thought of everything I had done for them, how I had sacrificed my own peace and happiness to be there for them. And yet, I was still treated like I didn't belong. I knew what I had to do. I spent the next day going over everything in my head. I needed to reclaim my dignity. I couldn't keep putting myself in a situation where I wasn't appreciated, where I was being used to fill gaps without any recognition. But it wasn't just about them. It was about me too. I needed to feel valued, needed for who I was, not just for what I could do. That evening, when Jake came in to ask for another mortgage contribution, I felt a strange calm wash over me. He was expecting me to say yes, but this time, I wouldn't. I couldn't. "Jake," I said, my voice steady, "I've helped with the mortgage every month. I've been helping in every way I can, but I've come to realize that I'm not your solution. I'm not a resource to be used and forgotten. I need you to understand that. It's time for me to step back." Jake looked at me, surprised, as though he hadn't anticipated this reaction. "Mom, But I held up my hand, stopping him. "I'm not saying I won't help, but I can't keep sacrificing myself for you and Claire. It's not fair to me. You've got to start figuring things out on your own." I stood up, looking at him with the firmest resolve I could muster. "I'm not going to be your emergency fund anymore." The silence between us was thick. Jake looked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. Instead, he just stood there, staring at me, as if trying to figure out who I was. "I'll make arrangements to leave in the morning," I said quietly, the decision feeling more final with each word. The next morning, I packed my things, feeling lighter with each item I removed from the room. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just done. Done with being invisible. Done with being treated as less than. As I left the house, I didn't look back. Jake stood in the doorway, but neither of us said anything. The door closed softly behind me, and for the first time in months, I felt free. I drove away slowly, the weight of my decision still settling in my chest, but I wasn't turning back. As I drove back to my house, I felt like a stranger, as though I had been away for much longer than just a few weeks. I hadn't realized how much I had allowed myself to fade into the background, into the periphery of their lives. I had become so wrapped up in being needed, in being useful, that I forgot who I was before any of this. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same, old, a little rundown, but still standing. I had been living in this house for years, but now it felt different. The silence that greeted me when I stepped inside was a reminder of how long I had been alone. It didn't feel like the house I had shared with Dan, but it was mine. It was still my home, the place I had worked so hard to create, even when no one else seemed to appreciate it. I took a deep breath and set my things down. The house felt emptier than before, but it wasn't a bad kind of emptiness. It was the kind that opened up possibilities. I started walking around the rooms, touching the furniture like it might disappear, but nothing had changed. I was still here, standing in the space I had once shared with the man I loved. The weight of the past didn't seem as heavy anymore. I was no longer carrying the burden of trying to make everyone else's life better, while mine quietly crumbled. I made myself a cup of tea, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened my bank account. It had been a while since I'd really paid attention to my finances, but now I knew I had to. I had been too generous for too long, letting others take from me without realizing the cost. I scrolled through the transactions, looking at the money I had sent Jake and Claire. I had helped them cover so much: mortgage payments, bills, groceries, even their kids' needs. But when I saw the total amount I had given over the past few months, it hit me like a punch in the stomach. It wasn't just money, it was my life, my energy, my savings, and it still wasn't enough. Something inside me shifted then. It wasn't anger that I felt, but a deep sense of clarity. I was done being the one who gave and gave, only to be discarded when I wasn't needed anymore. I was done sacrificing myself for a family that had lost sight of me as a person. I had spent my entire life giving to others, but I had never given enough to myself. I grabbed my phone and checked my calendar. I had an appointment with a financial advisor in the morning to discuss my options. It was time to take control of my own life. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least it was mine. The next day, I met with the financial advisor, a young woman named Emily, who seemed genuinely interested in my situation. I explained everything: how I had been helping Jake and Claire, how I had drained my savings to keep up with their needs, how they never seemed to appreciate it. Emily was shocked at how much I had given, but she didn't judge me. Instead, she helped me create a plan, one that would ensure I was financially secure, and most importantly, that I would never put myself in a position like this again. It was a relief to finally take control. I hadn't realized how much I had been living in a fog, caught up in the cycle of giving without receiving. Now, with a solid plan in place, I felt a little lighter. For the first time, I was taking care of myself. After the meeting, I spent the rest of the day doing things that made me feel good: reading a book, taking a long walk, organizing the spare room. It was strange at first, this feeling of freedom. But as the hours passed, I started to enjoy it. It was just me, my thoughts, and the space to breathe. I didn't hear from Jake or Claire that day. I didn't expect to. I had walked away, and I knew they would need time to process everything. But I wasn't angry anymore. I had finally realized that I wasn't responsible for their happiness, their struggles, or their mistakes. They needed to figure things out on their own, and I needed to figure out how to live my life without being defined by their expectations. But as I sat in the living room that night, sipping my tea, I realized there was still a part of me that missed the kids. I missed their laughter, the way Jake and Liam would tug at my sleeves, asking me to read them stories or help them with their schoolwork. I missed feeling needed by them. I found myself staring at the phone, hesitating. I wanted to call them. I wanted to hear their voices, to make sure they were okay. But I stopped myself. They were better off without me constantly swooping in to fix things. They needed to learn how to stand on their own, just as I was learning to stand on my own. The phone remained silent that night. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. I wasn't bombarded with requests for help, and for the first time in ages, I didn't feel the pressure of being constantly needed. I spent more time taking care of myself, focusing on things I had neglected for far too long, like my hobbies, my health, and my emotional well-being. I even started painting again. It had been years since I picked up a brush, but when I did, it felt like reconnecting with a long-lost friend. But still, there was a part of me that couldn't quite shake the feeling of loss. I had left Jake and Claire, but the idea of them struggling without me haunted me. I wondered if I had made the right decision. Would they ever realize what they had lost? Would they ever come to understand the sacrifices I had made for them? One evening, just as I was finishing up a painting, my phone buzzed. I picked it up and saw it was a message from Jake. My heart skipped a beat, and I stared at the screen for a moment before opening it. "Mom, can we talk? I miss you. I know things have been hard, and I know I've asked a lot from you, but I want to make things right. Can you please come by when you get a chance?" I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a plea for help. It was just a simple request for connection. I wasn't sure what to feel. On one hand, I wanted to rush to him, to hear him out, to make things right. But on the other hand, I knew I couldn't go back to the way things were, not without boundaries, not without respect. I took a deep breath and typed out a response. "I'll come by tomorrow afternoon, but only if you're ready to listen." The decision felt right. For once, it wasn't about fixing their problems. It was about setting the terms of my own life, my own boundaries. The following afternoon, I found myself standing in front of Jake's door, my hand hesitating just above the doorbell. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe I thought I'd find a repentant son, ready to apologize for everything. Maybe I thought I'd walk into the house and find it transformed, cleaner, quieter, with a family that truly understood the sacrifices I had made. But the truth was, I wasn't there for them anymore. I wasn't there to fix their problems or clean up their messes. I was there because Jake had asked. He wanted to talk. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't going to make excuses for them. This time, I was going to be honest. I was going to stand my ground. When Jake opened the door, I was surprised by how much he had changed in such a short time. He looked tired, worn down, but there was something else there too, a sense of humility, a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Mom," he said, his voice tentative. "Thanks for coming." I nodded, not sure what to say. I stepped inside, and the familiar chaos of the house hit me. The kids were running around, toys scattered across the floor, and Claire was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. It felt like nothing had changed, like the same tension still hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Jake led me into the living room where we sat down on the couch. He didn't speak at first. He just sat there, his hands nervously wringing together. I waited for him to start, knowing that this moment was pivotal. I had been giving for so long. I had been their safety net, their caretaker, their unpaid counselor. But now I was here for myself. This conversation was for me as much as it was for him. "I've been thinking about everything," Jake said finally, his voice low. "About what you said in your message. About how I've treated you." I looked at him, my heart heavy but resolute. "Jake, I've given everything to you and Claire. But I wasn't just giving you my money. I gave you my time, my energy, and my love. And it wasn't enough. I wasn't enough." He winced at my words, as if they hit him harder than he expected. "I know, Mom, I know, and I'm sorry. I've been so focused on keeping everything together, on trying to fix things, that I didn't realize what I was doing to you." I let his words hang in the air, feeling the weight of them. But I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't pretend like everything was fine. "I'm not a resource, Jake," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I'm not a financial backup or someone to call when things get tough. I'm your mother, and I deserve to be treated with respect. I deserve to be seen as a person, not just someone to bail you out when things go wrong. Jake's face turned red. He seemed to struggle with the weight of my words. I didn't see it that way. I never meant to treat you like that. You've always been there for me, for all of us, and I took it for granted. I shook my head. Taking me for granted isn't the same as appreciating me. You and Claire both acted like I owed you something, like I had to keep giving, keep sacrificing, just to be a part of your life. That's not how it works. There was a long silence between us, filled only by the distant sounds of the kids playing and Claire's low hum from the kitchen. It felt like everything was hanging on the edge of this conversation, like we were at a crossroads. Jake didn't speak for a while, and when he did, his voice was quieter, tinged with regret. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. For taking you for granted, for expecting too much, for not seeing what you were doing for us. I never meant to hurt you. I just didn't know how to ask for help in the right way. I looked at him, trying to process his words. He was trying, I could see that. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. You have to learn to stand on your own, Jake, I said softly. You and Claire both. I can't keep carrying you, and I'm not going to keep sacrificing my own happiness for yours. I've spent too long being invisible, trying to make everything work, trying to be the person you needed me to be. But now, I need to be seen for who I am. Jake looked at me, his eyes filled with something that I couldn't quite read. Remorse, maybe, but also something deeper. He seemed to understand the gravity of what I was saying, the truth that I had been holding back for so long. I get it now, Mom, he said quietly. I do. And I'm sorry it took me so long to realize. But I'm going to fix things. I don't want to keep living like this, and I don't want to keep relying on you. I'm going to take responsibility for myself, for my family. I promise. The weight of his promise hung in the air, and for the first time, I felt like he wasn't just apologizing because it was the right thing to do. He was apologizing because he genuinely understood the impact of his actions. It wasn't the end, not by a long shot, but it was a start, a beginning to something new. I hope you do, Jake, I said softly. I really do, but this time, I'm not going to be the one to fix it for you. You have to do it yourself. He nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat, but also in acceptance. There was a quiet shift in him, a realization that he had been leaning on me for too long, and I knew that this moment, this conversation, would be the catalyst for change, for both of us. I didn't expect everything to be fixed overnight. Relationships like these take time, especially when years of unspoken expectations and disappointments have built up between people. But for the first time in months, I felt like I had a voice again. I wasn't just a helper in their lives. I was a person with needs and boundaries. And Jake understood that. Over the next few weeks, things began to shift, but not in the way I had expected. It wasn't a dramatic change. There were no grand apologies or sweeping gestures, but little by little, Jake started to take responsibility for his actions. He made an effort to manage his finances better. He started spending more time with his kids, trying to be the father they needed. And Claire? She wasn't quite where I wanted her to be, but I could see her starting to change too. There were fewer complaints about money, fewer sighs when things didn't go as planned. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I spent more time focusing on myself. I returned to painting, something I hadn't done in years, and I felt the familiar rush of creativity and joy filling the space that had once been consumed by guilt and obligation. I even joined a book club at the local library, something that had always interested me, but that I had never had time for. One evening, Jake came over with the kids. They had a new board game, and he wanted me to play with them. It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to me. As we sat around the table, laughing and playing, I realized something. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't just the person who gave and gave. I was part of something, something that had room for me. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to be the fixer. I didn't have to save anyone. I could just be. It had been a few months since that conversation with Jake, and although things had changed, they hadn't exactly changed the way I imagined. At first, I thought everything would fall into place immediately. Jake and Claire would realize their mistakes, apologize for how they treated me, and we'd all live happily ever after. But life doesn't work like that. It wasn't a clean break, nor was it a perfect solution. It was a process, a slow, messy, often painful process. But it was one I was committed to. Jake began to make good on his promises. He showed up more consistently for the kids, started looking for a second job, and seemed to be taking his role as a father and husband more seriously. But there were moments when I could see the weight of the world on his shoulders. He still struggled with finances, still tried to juggle work, the kids, and Claire's seemingly endless demands. I knew he wasn't out of the woods yet, but for the first time in a long time, I could see the effort he was putting into making things right, not just for me, but for himself. Claire, on the other hand, was a bit more complicated. There were days when she was distant, just as she had been when I lived with them. But other times, I saw glimpses of something more. She'd show up at my door with a cup of coffee, or ask if I wanted to join them for dinner. It wasn't as frequent as I would have liked, but it was a start. The relationship I had with her wasn't as open or as easy as the one I shared with Jake. But I wasn't in a hurry anymore. I wasn't chasing their approval. I was letting them come to me at their own pace. The most striking change, though, came when I realized that I was no longer afraid of being alone. The silence of my house, once unbearable, had become my sanctuary. I didn't need to fill every moment with noise or company. I had spent so many years defining myself by what I could do for others, by how much I could give, how much I could fix, that I had forgotten how to simply be. I had forgotten that I was worth something, even without all the roles I had played. One day, about 6 months after I moved back into my house, I decided to take a trip. Just a short one, nothing extravagant. I rented a little cabin up in the mountains, far away from the noise, the demands, and the chaos. I needed space to think, to breathe, to reflect on everything that had happened in the past year, the loss of Dan, the tension with Jake and Claire, the journey I had been on to reclaim myself. The cabin was small, tucked into a quiet corner of the world, surrounded by trees that were just beginning to change with the season. The air was crisp, fresh, nothing like the stale, suffocating air I had been breathing in for the past few years. I spent the days hiking through the woods, reading by the fireplace, and writing in my journal. The time away was exactly what I needed. On the third day, as I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the mountains, I had a realization. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. I was finally living for myself. It wasn't about the money or the house or the roles I had played in their lives. It was about my peace, my happiness, my future. I had spent so long putting myself last, giving everything I had to everyone around me. But now, I knew I was allowed to put myself first. I was allowed to live for me. When I returned home, things with Jake and Claire were still not perfect, but they were better. Jake had made significant progress. He had paid off some of the debt they owed, and I could see that he was genuinely trying to rebuild his life. His kids were happy, and for the first time, I saw him as a man who was beginning to take responsibility, not just as a son, but as a father and a husband. One afternoon, Jake called me. He sounded more upbeat than I had heard him in a long time. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice warm. "I just wanted to thank you. I know things have been hard between us, but I'm finally starting to get it. I'm trying to change, and I know it's not going to happen overnight. But I want you to know that I'm not just doing this for the kids. I'm doing it for myself. You were right. I needed to stand on my own." I could hear the sincerity in his voice, and for the first time, I truly believed it. He wasn't asking for anything. There were no strings attached. He was simply acknowledging the growth he had made, and that was enough. "I'm proud of you, Jake," I said softly, my heart swelling. "I know it hasn't been easy, but you're doing the right thing. Just keep going." There was a pause before he spoke again. "I also wanted to ask, would you consider coming over for dinner this Sunday? Just us. I want to make it up to you. It's time." I felt a flutter in my chest. After everything that had happened, the distance, the misunderstandings, it meant something to me that he was offering. "I'd love that," I said, my voice a little thick. "I'll bring dessert." The conversation ended, and I sat there for a moment, reflecting on how far I had come. The woman who had once been invisible in her own family was now being invited to sit at the table as an equal. I wasn't just a helper. I wasn't just the person who bailed them out. I was Carol, a mother, a person with her own life, her own voice, her own worth. The evening of dinner arrived, and as I walked into Jake and Claire's house, something had shifted. It wasn't the same house I had left. The tension wasn't there. The air felt lighter. There was a warmth in their home, a kind of quiet respect that had been missing before. Jake greeted me at the door with a hug, and I could see the pride in his eyes. Claire was standing in the kitchen, but this time, she didn't look distracted. She looked at me with a smile. "Hi, Carol," she said, her tone genuine. "We're glad you're here." Dinner was simple but delicious. Roast chicken, roasted vegetables, a salad. But it was the conversation that made it special. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't rehash old wounds. We just shared a meal, talked about the kids, about life, about the little things that mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was no longer the person who gave everything without question. I wasn't the one who held it all together, the one who kept everything from falling apart. I had learned to set boundaries, to reclaim my own life. And in doing so, I had become someone who could finally accept love and respect on her own terms. As the evening came to a close, Jake and Claire thanked me for coming. I didn't need their thanks. I didn't need their approval. I had already given myself permission to live, to be, to thrive. And that, in itself, was the greatest gift of all. The weeks after that dinner felt like a continuation of the small victories I had been experiencing. Slowly but surely, things were shifting. Not just with Jake and Claire, but with myself. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no fireworks, just steady progress. I was learning too. Learning how to accept my own growth, how to hold space for myself and for others without sacrificing my well-being. Jake had kept his word. He was doing better, and though it wasn't perfect, I saw him taking real steps. He had taken responsibility for his finances, he was going to therapy, and he had even started spending more quality time with the kids. It wasn't the picture of perfection, but it was progress, and that was enough for me. He wasn't asking me to fix things anymore, and for the first time I realized that I wasn't responsible for fixing everything. Claire was still a work in progress. I could see she was trying, though. There were fewer passive-aggressive comments about money, fewer hints that she was irritated by the presence of my help. But I could also tell that her pride was still in the way. She wasn't ready to fully embrace the changes I needed from her, and perhaps That was because she wasn't yet ready to look in the mirror. I didn't push her, though. I knew that was a journey she had to take on her own. I focused on myself. I spent more time painting, went to yoga classes, and even started reading books I had put off for years. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't living for others. I wasn't rushing from one task to the next, trying to please everyone around me. I was reclaiming the parts of myself that had been buried for so long, and I was savoring it. But there was still one thing I hadn't quite figured out: how to completely let go. I had learned to set boundaries, but letting go of the old patterns, the old expectations, was harder than I anticipated. There were still moments when I found myself wanting to swoop in and take control, to make things easier for Jake, to help Claire when she was stressed. It was hard to resist the urge to fix things for them, to offer advice or money when I knew they needed it. But I had to remind myself that I couldn't do it anymore, not because I didn't care, but because they had to stand on their own. They had to find their way, just as I had found mine. The moment of truth came a few weeks later when Jake called me to ask for help again. The request was the same as it had been before. He needed money for a bill, just to make it through the month. The old me would have transferred the funds without thinking twice. But this time, I hesitated. I thought about the work I had done to rebuild my life, about the boundaries I had put in place, and I knew in that moment that it was time to let go. I didn't answer the call immediately. I let it ring out. I sat there, heart racing, as I thought about what I wanted to do. Finally, I picked up my phone and texted him, "Jake, I can't help with this right now. I've helped as much as I can, and I need you to figure this one out on your own." It wasn't easy. I could feel the pull in my chest, the desire to fix everything. But I had to let him learn how to solve his own problems. I had to trust that he was strong enough to do it, even if it meant facing the consequences of his choices. He texted back almost immediately. "I understand, Mom. I'll figure it out. Thanks for everything." And just like that, a weight lifted off my shoulders. I hadn't given in. I hadn't caved. I had let him take responsibility for his life. It felt good, but it also felt foreign. This wasn't the woman I used to be, the one who gave and gave until there was nothing left. This was a new version of me, one who had learned that love didn't mean losing yourself in someone else's needs. Love meant respecting boundaries, even when it was hard. The next few days passed quietly. There were no urgent calls, no requests for help. Jake and Claire were both trying to navigate their own lives, and I was no longer hovering in the background, trying to fix everything. It felt strange, almost like I was losing touch with them, but in reality, it was the opposite. By stepping back, by letting them face their challenges without me, I was creating space for real growth. I wasn't abandoning them. I was letting them stand on their own. One afternoon, I was sitting in my garden, surrounded by the flowers I had spent so much time tending to, when Jake showed up unexpectedly. He had a hesitant look on his face, and for a moment, I wondered if something had gone wrong. But then he smiled, and I saw the change in him. It was subtle, but it was there. "Mom," he said softly, sitting down next to me. "I just wanted to say thank you for not giving me money this time. It wasn't easy, but I think it was what I needed. I've been working extra hours and cutting back on expenses. I'm starting to get it, Mom. I'm starting to stand on my own, and I couldn't have done that without you letting me go." His words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I was silent, just letting them sink in. I had been so afraid of letting him go, of letting him face his struggles alone. But now I saw that it was exactly what he needed. "You're welcome, Jake," I said quietly, feeling a tear slip down my cheek. "I'm proud of you." He smiled, and for the first time, I saw him not just as my son, but as an adult, a man who had finally learned how to take responsibility for his life. And in that moment, I realized that I had learned something too. I had learned that love doesn't mean always giving. Love means knowing when to step back and trust that the people you love can figure things out on their own. It means letting go, not out of anger, but out of faith. Faith that they can make it without you, and faith that they will come back to you when they truly need you. That evening, Claire and Jake invited me over for dinner, but this time, I didn't feel like an outsider. I wasn't there as a helper or a savior. I was just there. Just Carol. I didn't need to fix anything. I didn't need to do anything. I just needed to be. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The house was quieter, the air lighter. We talked about the kids, about the future, about all the little things that make up life. We didn't talk about money or problems or anything that had weighed us down in the past. It was just a simple dinner, a simple evening together. And for once, it felt right. As the evening wound down and I left their home, I realized something important. I wasn't just reclaiming my life. I was also learning how to embrace it again. I was learning how to live for me, and in doing so, I had found something I had been missing for so long: peace. It had been several weeks since I had the conversation with Jake, and I could feel a subtle shift in the way I approached everything. I no longer needed their approval, nor did I expect them to repay me for everything I had done. I had finally stopped searching for validation from the people I had tried so hard to please for so many years. The more I lived for myself, the more I understood that true peace didn't come from being needed. It came from being enough as I was, without conditions or expectations. The house, once a place filled with quiet desperation, had become my sanctuary. I had been through so much: grief, frustration, sacrifice. But now I was learning how to create joy in the simple moments. I could spend an entire afternoon tending to my garden, planting new flowers or reading a book on the porch without feeling guilty about not doing something for someone else. I no longer feared the silence of my home. It wasn't loneliness, it was freedom. Freedom to be me, without apology. Jake and Claire had their struggles, but they were learning to face them. Jake had started attending financial counseling, and Claire, though still distant at times, had begun to let go of some of the control she had always clung to. It wasn't perfect, and I didn't expect it to be. There were still challenges, still moments when they both slipped into old habits. But that was their journey, not mine. I had my own path to walk now. One Sunday afternoon, after a long morning spent at the farmer's market, I received a call from Jake. My stomach tightened at the thought of him asking for help again, but I quickly dismissed the worry. Things had changed between us, and I knew he wouldn't ask unless it was something important. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice different this time, calm and steady. "I just wanted to check in. How are you doing?" I smiled, walking out into my backyard, letting the sun warm my skin. "I'm doing great, Jake. I've been spending a lot of time working on my garden. It's been so peaceful here." There was a pause on the other end, as if he was trying to find the right words. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he continued, "about standing on my own. I guess I didn't really get it before. I've been relying on you for so much, and I wasn't even aware of it. I'm trying to be better, not just for the kids, but for myself too. And I just wanted to say thanks. Thanks for showing me what it means to take responsibility." The words landed gently in my chest. I had waited so long to hear them, and yet, when they finally came, they didn't feel like a victory. They just felt like the natural result of the work we had both done to grow. I'm proud of you, Jake, I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. It's not easy, but you're doing it. Just keep going. He didn't say much after that, but there was a deep sincerity in his voice that made my heart swell. We talked for a few more minutes before hanging up, and as I stood there in the quiet of my backyard, I realized something. I wasn't waiting for him to change anymore. I wasn't waiting for Claire to finally see me. I was living my own life on my terms. A few weeks later, Jake invited me over for dinner again. This time, I wasn't nervous or anxious. I wasn't worried about being scrutinized or feeling out of place. I was simply going to spend time with my son and his family, to enjoy their company without feeling like I was playing a role. When I arrived at their house, I was greeted by Jake at the door, who gave me a genuine smile and a warm hug. Claire was in the kitchen, her phone nowhere in sight, actually cooking for once, rather than ordering takeout as she used to do. The kids were running around, their laughter filling the house in a way that made everything feel alive again. Dinner was simple, but the energy in the room was different this time. It wasn't filled with tension or hidden resentment. It was filled with acceptance of each other, of ourselves, and of the hard work that had been done to rebuild the relationships between us. After dinner, we sat on the porch, drinking coffee and talking about everything and nothing. We spoke about the kids, about the future, and even about the past, though it was no longer the elephant in the room. We didn't gloss over our struggles, but neither did we dwell on them. There was a lightness now, a sense of understanding that hadn't been there before. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly part of this family. Not because I was needed, but because I was wanted. I wasn't the fixer anymore. I wasn't the one holding everything together. I was simply Carol, mother, grandmother, a woman who had learned to stand on her own and find peace within herself. As I drove home that night, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in my heart. I had learned to let go of the expectations I had placed on my family, and I had learned to set boundaries that allowed me to live for myself without guilt or fear of being forgotten. I no longer had to be the one to make things work. I was working on my own life, my own happiness, and in doing so, I had found freedom. The road ahead still held uncertainties, and there would always be moments when I felt the pull of old habits, wanting to jump in and help, wanting to fix things for Jake and Claire. But I had learned that my peace was worth more than their approval. I had learned that by stepping back, I allowed them the space to grow, just as I had grown. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about everything that had happened, the heartache, the sacrifices, the quiet betrayals, and the slow journey to reclaiming myself. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I felt whole. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift I could give myself.